Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today, we are thrilled to be talking to actress Denée Benton, star of the HBO Max hit series, The Gilded Age. We're going to kick things off by introducing you to the African members on the call today, starting with Jill Monroe in Los Angeles, DJ Lockhart in Los Angeles, Karan Lenoir Kelly, I said it right this time, in Charlottesville, Virginia, Ruben Regaud in South Florida, Nancy Green in LA, and Jeffrey Peterson in Atlanta. I'm going to let you guys do what you do so well, and I'll see you on the other side.
There's a moment when a young girl turns into a woman. It's dark and it's light, complicated and not just pretty, with a hint of what's to come.
When you have a nice house, money, you're invited everywhere. What more is there?
I'm not sure you understand. Some people want more.
Do I sense rebellion in our midst?
We are the next generation. I think we should fight for that.
You promised I could marry for love.
Let me be my own person.
I want to know if I get a say in our children's lives.
I won't question your business if you don't question mine.
I suppose there's no match for you in wielding authority.
Now who's being dramatic?
My goal was to be a good wife and mother, but I suppose young women don't want that anymore.
Oh, I want to be a good wife and mother who has the vote.
I'm building her future. Nothing can go wrong. Not now.
Our family is on the verge of collapse.
This is how it starts. First divorce, then exclusion from society.
There's no logic in this at all.
Society is not known for its logic, especially where women are concerned.
Everything's at stake.
I can fix this.
They're living the American dream.
From which someday they may presumably wake up.
My question is, overall, we're able to see Peggy navigate race, class, and ambition in a time where obviously that was very difficult. Has your preparation or your process through that role kind of shaped the way that you see your own voice or purpose as an artist today?
I'm always so connected with Peggy because of I feel like a piece of me is Peggy, and a lot of the people who stop me on the street, especially the women who love the show, I can tell they feel like a piece of them is Peggy too. I feel like there have been Peggys of every generation that have really carved out and been kind of real trailblazers of their own. And so I absolutely see myself in her. And I kind of feel like I walk alongside her and felt so protective of her story because I understood how enlivening it would feel to watch that kind of example create her own sovereignty in a time where we honestly aren't even taught to imagine what Black people were doing in the 1880s. I feel like in school, we kind of skipped from emancipation and went to Jim Crow. And there's this whole 60-year period where we're not really taught to pay that much attention to ourselves. And so it kind of feels like we've gotten to breathe life into these people that were shaping the world we live in now.
Got you. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Nancy Green here. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the dynamic or sort of the parallel between Peggy and Gladys in terms of the courtships that are going on there, and sort of, one side wanting her, Gladys to marry the Duke, and then with Peggy, the doctor, and the obstacles there, particularly with Arthur and him being a former slave and kind of having personal issues there with how he was being treated. So I wanted to know if you could talk a bit about that and the dynamic there.
Yeah, we got Louisa and Thaisa and I, they played Gladys and Marion, all got to be in a piece together. And it was like, essentially, the next generation sort of becomes the leading ladies of the Gilded Age. And it feels like that, like we all kind of came into the show as these sort of budding ingenues, and along with our characters have really grown into these women that we are, that are navigating the space. And I think that Peggy really taking her rightful place in these love stories, in these courtships, also kind of elevates the real estate she gets to take up on the show. And I feel like we've both watched Peggy and Gladys kind of be suffocated by their parents and figure out how to carve their own path. And with Gladys, it's interesting because we're watching her start to use her mother's tools in order to succeed. And whereas with Peggy, it's interesting because we're watching her parents really learn how to be on her team. And I think it's such a beautiful story of healing. We get to see, no one would have blamed Peggy for never speaking to her parents again after what she went through with them, but we get to see this beautiful story of repair and see them really ride for Peggy and be like, no, they're, the Kirklands are going to make it seem like you're the one who's flawed, but you're the one who's worthy to make this choice regardless. And I thought that was like a really beautiful kind of turn on its head of what could have been something that they could have felt ashamed of her as well.
Thank you, thank you. And it's very interesting. I like kind of watching the dynamic there. So.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Peterson. I'm curious, how did you hope your character would expand as you move from season 1 to 2 to 3? Because I was a bit of a binger. I watched season 1 and 2, I want to say only a month ago. So I was really fascinated by this character that was kind of in the background a little bit, developing the relationship with the family. And then next thing I know, you're going past the Mason-Dixon line and you're in a barn. And then now I feel like you're prominent, like it's almost your show. So I'm curious, how did you hope that your character would kind of grow over the seasons?
I love that question. I mean, in 2019, when I auditioned for this show, really it was me and Dr. Dunbar and Sally were the only Black people involved with the show in any kind of consistent manner. And at the time, Audra and John were going to be recurring in smaller ways. And I think that the three of us really were like, there's an opportunity here. We don't have to be footnotes in this. Like, we can really advocate to expand the Black elite storyline to be a vital part of this show, not something that we cut to. And so we started planting the seeds then, 6 years ago. And the shutdown with pandemic also gave us time to really make sure that Peggy wasn't falling into tired stereotypes, but was really set up to expand. And so it almost makes me tearful to see how incredibly successful that seed has blossomed into this ecosystem, because they never imagined that it would end up, we'd have a cast with, Felicia Rashad. T. Thomas Fortune was not a character that was imagined at that time. Peggy was going to go work at a white newspaper, but we were able to advocate for these precedents that existed. And now the show as a whole is more successful because of the ways that we watered this garden. And so it was always my dream that Peggy would really take her space as one of the rightful leading ladies on the show. And even more than just Peggy, that we take our place as a prominent house in the show. Now you've got the Van Ryns, you've got the Russells, but you've also got the Scotts. And that makes me very proud.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
My name is Ruben Peralta from Cocaleca.net. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I feel like that Clara and Peggy are writing history while the show is, advancing. Do you have this conversation previous the show started, and how Peggy is gonna be evolving in 3 seasons, and how important is costume and set design for embody Peggy?
Yeah, that was also a big part of our advocating work. I think originally Peggy was going to be a bit more in the role of Marion's companion. And so was going to be just moving through the world in a much narrower way. But as we were able to advocate for her to take up more space, Kasha and I also got to have a lot of conversations. Kasha is our incredible costume designer, about just politically, even the colors that Peggy is in, really making sure that she's not only in drab colors, that we're not just seeing her in brown and black and navy blue, but what does it mean to see her color palette expand? And that was something that was really exciting for me with this season, with her going to Newport and not only being in professional settings, that poppy color red and white dress, it's like, it can't be understated that when my grandmother growing up would always tell me that they were encouraged to wear really dark colors because she was told that our skin didn't look good in bright colors. And I'm like, it's so insane, you know, the ways that that kind of manipulation can get into us dimming ourselves. And so I felt really strongly that Peggy's color arc get to expand. And so I think every season we've gotten to take it up a notch. And Kasha is now sort of outdoing herself in the finale. I'm just so excited for everyone to see, you know, we get to see Dr. Kirkland ask Peggy to the ball in the last episode. And I think that audiences are going to be really, their breath is going to be taken away at the black ball that we get to see. That was something we dreamt about 6 years ago and didn't know that it would actually come to be.
Thank you.
Hello, Denée. My name is Karan Lenoir Kelly. I am the lead of Karanism.com and Love Music Pleasure. And I'm really interested in her love story. I also want to ask you about the fact that your character is a beautiful, brilliant, dark-skinned Black woman who is given autonomy in this space that we don't really see in period pieces. We just don't see it. What does it mean to you to not just have that space, but what does it mean to you to really move it forward and within the context of a Black elite family?
I mean, it means everything to me. It's sort of my ethos personally as an artist. I think that I'm getting to work directly with the women who broke down those doors for me, you know, with Audra McDonald and Felicia Rashad. And Felicia's telling us stories about working with Diane Carroll for the first time. And Diane Carroll is the only reason any of us are here on television, taking up the space that we're taking up. And so I feel chills that I'm in this kind of direct line. And I can see, even on Broadway now, when I look at some of the younger women who've come up behind me, the dark-skinned women who take their space as ingenues, it was also because of this path that we saw for ourselves and carved. And so I remember when I auditioned for the role, even I assumed that they would cast someone who was mixed or lighter skinned to kind of tell that elite story. And for it to be me and John and Audra, I was like, oh, we're doing something here. We're really going to take up some space. And you know, everyone can make it sound like it's just about representation, but it's so much deeper than that. It's about access, and it's about visibility, and it's about really getting to take up space in your own sovereignty. And we get to see Peggy taking the train, going to interviews. Like in some ways, she gets to move more freely than a lot of the other women on the show because she's not tied into the same kind of rules as white society. And so we get to see her move with more freedom than Marian and Gladys do. And I think for me, the success story of Peggy being on the screen, but also the ways we've expanded the story has meant more Black actors have been hired on our show. It's meant that we have a Black woman writer who's a co-EP and co-writer on our show. Like, this is real, tangible credits and checks and access that is not just happening on screen, but it's happening behind the screen as well. And that to me is just like the biggest success story. And it makes it feel so much bigger than me. And that to me is like, that's like the gift of art. Like if you get to work on something that touches all of those things, it becomes spiritually fulfilling in an even deeper way than playing a role, you know?
I love so much how you express that, because the only other Peggy we know is from Hamilton, and she was an afterthought. You are brilliant in this role, and I'm really grateful. So thank you for your response, your thoughtful response to my question. Thank you.
Hi, Jill Monroe again. So the Gilded Age takes place in the same period that America was fighting for who gets to tell the truth, our past, our history. And so what do you think that Peggy would have to say about the cost of truth for Black women then, and even under the current times where we are now?
You know, it's interesting, Peggy. Obviously, we can't ignore that our show is so much about wealth, and the Gilded Age in its time was so much about wealth disparity. And Peggy is protected by the fact that she has wealth to fall back on in a different way, and but we get to watch her really use that in every season to go back and serve her community in some capacity. The ways that she stays involved with, the ways that we get to see the foundation of the suffrage movement, last season with Sarah Garnett, them fighting for the public schools. We get to really see what it means to use your privilege. And I think that Peggy would probably hope that more wealthy people now were taking the time to do that. I think we're watching a lot of our leaders kind of forget what it's like to go back and re-engage and to make sure that you're pulling people with you. And that to me was the most exciting, because I think that the risk was so high when Peggy was doing it. I don't think she could ever really delude herself into thinking that she was that far away from where, any other Black person at that time was. One wrong move could end them all in the same consequence. And I think nowadays wealth can kind of delude us from remembering that we're all in the same fight.
Amazing, thank you.
I have another question more towards the preparation for the role. A lot of Black Americans are finding out more about themselves, and there are a lot more stories being told, like this one, of people post-Civil War and during Reconstruction and in that general area of history. Have you been able to, I guess, relate to your character more on a familiar or personal level as you've progressed with this character?
Absolutely. I mean, even just the daughter Peggy is, I really relate to just the times in history. I'm from Florida, and my parents were raised in the Jim Crow South. And, I don't take for granted that I'm the first generation in my family's bloodline that was born into human rights, really, that were written in the law books. And very similarly, Peggy is the first generation in her bloodline that's born into this sort of access to freedom, and what it's like to have a father who built something from scratch and is like, oh no, you're going to walk the path I've laid out for you because I bled for this. And I think it's a very specific, almost first generation story, but on American soil, that I just really related to, especially when I was reading some of what the Black journalists were writing about in the 1880s. It was a real fight for how do we save Reconstruction? And it's what we're dealing with now, with Project 2025. They Project 2025 Reconstruction, and they're kind of trying to do a version of it now. And, I was able to see the cycles that our country has been in for a long time, and the ways that different movements have collaborated and kind of used their ways to stay in community and keep the fight going forward. And so it was all it was like chillingly similar, I think.
Got you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Hi. One of the things that I love about Peggy, it's that she's so rebellious, that she have this, I don't know, difficult relationship with her family. But it's rooted for love. Like she knows that they love him. How do you approach something like that, and work with that fine line between show that she cares, but also that she has her own way of doing things?
Yeah, it felt so deeply personal. I feel like maybe this is a generalization, but I do feel like any child of color understands that particular kind of tough love and that particular kind of fight for your own sovereignty, when you know how much the people that came before you fought for you, but you also have to remind them that, well, you fought for me to also have my own choices and be free. And I think that we get to watch Peggy stretch even what they saw as possible for themselves and for her. And it gets to be this like intergenerational liberation story as well, in a way that I find to be really beautiful, because all of them are touched by the confines of their time, and they so deeply want to protect her, and there's a lot to protect her from. But Peggy, some people are born to be visionaries, and Peggy is one of those people. And I do think that you end up on the front lines in Tuskegee, Alabama, when you're a person who is meant to go see beyond your own borders. And I don't know that everyone's called to that, but I think that it's exciting to watch the people who are.
So I was curious about the novel and the fact that she's doing this at a time when it was very difficult for women to have any sort of career. I mean, you see with one of the other dynamics, the teacher, she is being criticized for making money. And also, being that Peggy is Black, having this sort of accomplishment going on for her. I wanted to know if you could talk a bit about that and how they kind of work that into the series.
I think what's cool about our show and what's amazing about the way Erica Dunbar's brain works and Julianne Fellowes' brains work is that there's precedent for almost everything. So Peggy, she's not based on this person, but Julia C. Collins was the first Black woman in the United States to publish a novel. And I think she did it in the 1850s maybe, but there's like always precedent where we get to say like this was rare, but it did happen. And then you get to imagine around, well, I wonder what that would have been like for her to move through that space. And similarly, like there was this book called Black Gotham that Peggy's family is sort of based off of, this Black pharmacist family in the 1880s that lived in Brooklyn at that time. And so it was sort of like getting out of the idea of it being fantasy and really rooting it in like, okay, well, some people did it, and what did their neighborhoods look like, and what would these conversations had looked like. And it's not so dissimilar to now, where there are so many spaces that are gate kept, but there are a few of us who break through. I think that it's a tightrope that many of us still understand, even if there's like a few more that are let in than before. It was like, I think Peggy was just very focused on what was available to her.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
It did. I mean, I was just fascinated by that. I already knew that, but yeah, or I didn't know the specific person, but I knew that was a historical.
I kind of want to stay in that same vein. I understand that you're playing a fictional character, but I'm curious, are there other historical figures that you're kind of channeling through Peggy? When I watch her on screen, I'm thinking of Tony, I'm thinking of Harlem Renaissance era, I'm thinking of Angela Davis, even people that aren't even alive yet during your character's time. So I'm just curious, is there a historical figure that you're channeling as you're playing that part?
Absolutely. I think of Philip White's daughter, who was, the pharmacist's daughter who had to, had her coming out ball. But I also really think a lot about Ida B. Wells, who was writing a lot and sort of went from a teacher to a happenstance journalist because of the fight that she was a part of, and traveled through the country in all of these different ways and moved through these different regions, and did go to Tuskegee, Alabama to see the school that Peggy ended up writing about that would become the first HBCU. And so I think of Peggy a lot as sort of a hybrid of those people, simply because she's so politically minded.
Hey, Denée, it's Karan again.
Hi.
I want to know what, during this journey of exploring your character, many of us are journalists, but some of us are not by trade. I want to know what you learned about journalism and journalists exploring this character.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it was interesting because Peggy didn't set out to be a journalist. She set out to be a creative writer, and then someone sees in her that like, oh, you could do this. You have this mindset. And I feel really similar to that. I've set out to be an actor, but I end up finding myself speaking in advocacy spaces or speaking in different ways that are just sort of born out of my own personal passions, and you kind of learn on the go. And I think with Peggy, it was really exciting to learn about the precedent of the Globe. Like I just didn't, and just the precedent of Black newspapers in general at that time, how vital they were to sharing information across state lines. And it was it was a network. It was like a movement network. And so much of it was successful because it was like pamphlets that were handed out on the street. And to think of T. Thomas Fortune, who was born into slavery, but then got trained in journalism in Jacksonville, Florida, before making his way up to New York. It's like just thinking of what those sojourns were like at that time, and how it wasn't it wasn't what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't like a frivolous interest. Like, journalism was like a real vital part of every liberation movement that's happened since emancipation. And as soon as people were allowed to learn to read and write on a mass scale, and that there would be read-ins that I didn't know about for people who didn't know how to read and write yet, but people in the community would like read the newspapers to everyone to know what the community was fighting for at that time. And I thought it was really beautiful to learn the history of that, which I don't know that it serves the same purpose today, but at that time it was a really vital part of every successful movement that's happened so far.
Well, I'm grateful for your performance as Peggy, because journalism has always been a function of democracy, and you have really portrayed her in a way that embodies the empathy that's required to be responsible in journalism. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate the writers in this, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Denée, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is really, really, really some good stuff. We are so looking forward to seeing how things develop as we move into season 4. How do you want to see the character continue to go?
It's so interesting. I mean, I love that we're getting to see Peggy feel really chosen in love, and I'm really curious to see what, this Brooklyn power couple gets to look like. If it's successful, you've got this doctor, you've got this journalist, and she's a writer, and they're advocates for their community. I'm curious to see Peggy balance what parenting and her career is like at that time, and to just kind of get to see her integrate her life and really blossom into the life that she's fighting for herself versus just dreaming towards it. I think we'll get to see her start living it. And I'm curious to see how it all pans out.
Well,
and I want to see her get a really amazing wedding episode now that I know we have a season 4. That's what I'm advocating for.
Well, we can't wait. So again, on behalf of the world's largest group of Black film and TV critics, congratulations, and thank you for joining us for this edition of AAFCA Roundtables.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denée. It's so lovely to meet you.